Hello, everyone, and welcome to season 2 of Ministry Mondays with Meg. I'm Meg, still, but we welcome everyone. I'm Reverend Meg Biddle, and I currently serve as the National Coordinator for Ministry Life and the American Baptist Personnel Services um, at ABHMS. And I work in the home office in the Lamb. That's located in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. And that's my commercial. Um, I am really excited about this season. We've got great guests coming up, and my first guest today. See, look, I'm out of habit. Look, I was supposed to show my name and all that stuff. My first guest this season is Reverend Dr. Seth David Clark, who's author of Church at the Wall.
For all of you who are listening and not watching, Meg is holding up a book that you should buy.
Yes, buy the book. Buy the book. You should buy it at JudsonPress.com. You can buy it at can you buy it at your website, I'm sure?
Yeah.
Link to buy it? Yeah.
Yeah, you can buy it at SethDavidClark.com.
Yeah.
And if you're an e-reader type, I think it's on that bad site, Amazon.
Right. Right. I'm sure it probably is. So Seth, thank you so much for being my first guest for season 2. I appreciate it. So for those who may not know you, I mean, I've been in American Baptist all my life, and I don't think we've ever actually paths have crossed.
Yeah, that's maybe because I'm a latecomer to the ABC fam.
Are you?
Okay. I am. Maybe I can tell a little bit about my background. How's that sound?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I grew up in a Christian tradition called the Plymouth Brethren movement. And for those of you who don't know what that is, but you know a little bit about American pop culture and how it relates to Christianity. You maybe remember those books and movies, Left Behind. Yeah, that like rapture stuff that really got popularized by the Plymouth Brethren and John Nelson Darby back in the mid 19th century, and then even more so early in the 20th century with the Schofield Study Bible. But that was like our bread and butter, right? So end times fervor, but no pastors, right? And I kind of felt like this call to ministry, but you can't be a pastor in the Plymouth Brethren because they didn't have any. So that was a little weird. So I kind of traveled around denominationally for several years and picked up some nice learnings along the way and figured out a little bit more who I was along the way. And I remember at one point, I was kind of praying, maybe complaining to God. I don't know. Those are one and the same sometimes.
They are indeed.
And I told God, I was like, you know what, God, I think I'm American Baptist, but I'm in Southern California. There are very few of the churches out here because a lot of them left about 15, 20 years ago to transformation ministries. But that's not for me. I think American Baptist, and then little by little, there was an open door at the church I'm at now, First Baptist Church of National City. And I had to push the crack open a little bit. The executive minister of Abco Flash, our region, he said, I think it's okay for me. So he said, I saw your resume and I thought, he's not the right guy.
And I don't think he watches, so I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah, maybe he does. It's okay. Because what happened is he said that after he realized, oh, maybe I am the right guy. It took a little work on my part to show who I was and what I was all about. So I'm pretty excited that after all, I got in the door and I got into the American Baptist, and through being part of this local church, I got ordained. And so I've been around for a little bit over half a decade now, and having been around the block denominationally, I've seen the good and the bad, and a lot of different kinds of Protestant Christianity and Catholics too. I did some Catholic studies. at Boston College. But yeah, at the end of the day, the bigness, the broadness of the American Baptists, and the way that we as a communities of faith are really, really interested in allowing for local autonomy and expression, I think is just, that's where I'm at, right? Because I think people on the ground know more how things ought to go than people far, far away. So,
I agree. I agree. That the whole autonomy thing is beautiful and lovely most of the time. You know, sometimes it would be nice if there were some things that were standard, but you know,
yeah, right. That's like the downside, right? Is
yeah,
we had some pretty big church conflict the year after I got to the church, like really big, like church split kind of stuff. And you know, that same executive minister was really helpful, but at the end of the day, all he could do was sit there and say, right? There's no authority there, right? So
right.
there's the good and the bad, right? Every system, church or otherwise, there's a light side and a shadow side. So, but
Exactly.
I'm gonna hold on to the light for us.
Okay, that sounds good. So
Yeah.
you became this lead pastor coming out of Plymouth Brethren, right? I got that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Plymouth Brethren.
That's
Plymouth,
that one I
England.
have to. Okay.
Yeah.
Now the Schofield Bible, that thing, I'm acquainted with that. My husband grew up
Mm-hmm.
regular
Mm-hmm.
Baptist church. And then the lead pastor where you're at now, that National City, did that
Mm-hmm.
come first? This Church of the Wall? Did it come together? How did all this
Okay, yeah.
how did
That's
I mean, like, I'm really curious. So you got to the church, you had a big blow up kind of thing.
sure.
How do you end up where you are now? I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great
walk me
question.
through some of this.
Yeah. So, before I was involved with American Baptist, I dabbled in United Methodism. I dabbled, and through that, I got to know a Methodist pastor pretty well. His name's John Fanistow, and he was the person who started the Border Church, right? So the church that meets at the wall, and he started it not as a church. It wasn't like a church plant. It was just an expression of community and communion, and honestly, a little bit of religious activism there at the wall, saying there's a greater authority than the U.S. government. There, in that greater authority, God is more interested in community and communion than division and separation, which is what walls are doing. So, November 2011, he started a weekly practice of communion on both sides of the wall. And since I knew him, and I ended up in National City, which is in what's called South Bay, San Diego, so closer to the border. I thought, you know what, that might be a nice kind of ministry to the people around, because at that time, a lot of families, mostly of Mexican heritage, they would meet there on both sides of the fence. So a lot of people, they're very misinformed about border issues, migration issues, because it's a political football right now. But you can be in the U.S. perfectly legally, but not be able to leave because of whatever paperwork you have. Or you can, try to meet with family members, but they don't have what it takes even to get a day pass to come into the U.S., like a day visa. So this place, Friendship Park, where the Border Church meets, we've been meeting there, and folks have been kind of trying to keep that space open for a long time. It started in 1971 with Pat Nixon, Richard Nixon's wife, when he was the president. She came down and said, I hope that there won't be a fence too long here. Unfortunately, the fence only grew. But she wanted there to be an international friendship park, and they kind of inaugurated it, but there was no legislation behind it. So it was official, unofficial, this weird spot, and still in this weird spot. So flash forward, it became one of the only kind of semi-official or official meeting spots for separated families on the entire U.S.-Mexico border, which, if you know anything about it, is pretty long. And so people would come from all over the U.S., all over Mexico. We've had families from New Jersey, from the Mid-Atlantic, from Seattle, from the Southeast, and then in Mexico from locally in Tijuana all the way down to Puebla and Mexico City, all over, right? All over. And this was this place where people were able to meet. And part of what we were trying to do with the church down there is just be in solidarity with them, solidarity with these families. Because the Border Patrol sometimes, even though they committed to this space being open 10 to 2 on Saturdays and 10 to 2 on Sundays, they'd close up shop early. So our 1:30 half-hour binational bilingual communion service, in some ways, was meant to honor them and be kind of a wedge to hold that gate open for them, because if the park is being used every week, well, maybe they won't close down early. Well, that's a really nice idea, and it worked for a while. But before COVID, Border Patrol actually shut the gate on the U.S. side for Friendship Park, and they've not opened it since in any meaningful way. Right. So for our Sunday services, we're still trying to meet, trying to gather, but we're about 90, 100 feet away on the U.S. side, calling in, and they have speaker systems that they plug us into on that side, and we can barely see each other through the two fences, but we're still trying to have communion and community and break bread across and along the border there. So it's beautiful, but it's tragic. And on top of that, the Biden administration, so everyone has different politics, but the Biden administration, in my politics, are pretty pro-migrant, right? They came in and he made this campaign promise saying not one more foot of border wall. Well, as politicians often do, they changed their mind. Where they lie, I don't know. And so last year in 2022, we found out that the Border Patrol was planning on ripping out the 18-foot walls that are there and putting in the Trump team designed 30-foot walls that are much uglier and provide even less of a line of sight. So for us, being 100 feet away from each other, if those were in between us, whatever semblance of a park that is left would be completely annihilated. And it would just be even more militarized operation zone, right? So like when you see those ATVs and those trucks and SUVs kind of rolling back and forth at high speeds, with Border Patrol agents who look like they are on a battlefield, it does not really indicate a spirit of welcome or neighborliness or anything. Last I checked, the Mexican-American War ended in the 1840s, and there was a peace agreement that put the current border lines down, and we're supposed to be buddies now, right? We have NAFTA, or now USMCA, and we have all these agreements, and yet we treat their people, and the people to the south maybe even more so, not so much as humans who are in need of help, but as nuisances who are in need of being kicked out or kept out. It's pretty sad. So every Sunday at the border, we try to proclaim something greater, which is communion, community, a big God who transcends borders. And most Sundays, I try to preach to myself as much as anyone else there that for these walls to come down, we first have to allow God to tear down the walls in our hearts. And regardless of what neighborhood our listener is in, dear listener, I think God's probably trying to do a little work in your heart too to tear down some walls.
I mean, how heartbreaking that must be to go week after week and experience and experienced that. How, in the midst of all this mess, do people find hope?
Good question. Oh my goodness. Yeah, right. It's because it is heartbreaking, and compassion fatigue is a real thing, right?
Yeah.
So one way you could easily just kind of deal with it is to allow yourself to be hardened towards all the injustice and sadness. But trying not to do that.
Yeah.
The subtitle of the book, Church of the Wall, is Stories of Hope, right? Stories of Hope along the U.S.-Mexico border. So there's hope there. There is hope there. I think I see it every time I go in small ways, right? In the book I talk about catching glimpses of the basileia. Basileia is just the Greek word that we often translate as reign, kingdom because of imperialism and maybe some sexism. That language might be a little bit outdated, but this understanding of God's reign, God's presence, God's plan and power being in action, in effect, impacting the world, impacting the borderlands, impacting people at those fences, at those walls. I think I still see that. One thing that those of us of a certain kind of justice-oriented persuasion maybe do a little too often is we focus on the injustice in a way, not that focusing on that is wrong, right? Because justice in the world is important. Right. But we focus in on a way that it almost mows over the whole life existence of these people who are experiencing injustice, right? Because they have hopes, they have dreams, they have joys, they have happiness. Their kids still play, they still giggle and make jokes, and there's still, for many of them, just a deep sense of abiding faith, trust, and hope in God. And if we see them only as victims, I think we perpetuate the victimization of them, because through our own lens, we don't see them first and foremost as people who bear the image of God, and as people who are made in God's likeness, and through Christ made to become like God in a beautiful way. So I think focusing on that for me, right? These are people. These are not just victims.
It's not the them and the us.
Right. Try not to, because this whole oh, you're experiencing injustice, and then now I'm going to other you in this other way.
Yeah.
That is about as ugly, not quite, but it can lead to some ugliness in similar ways to the different kinds of othering that happened in the first place.
Yeah. So why write the book? Was that part of a calling as well? Because I could certainly see that. I mean,
yeah. Oh, good question. So I did a doctorate of ministry program at Columbia Theological Seminary in the Atlanta area, and that's actually a Presbyterian USA school, and good folks over there. And for my doctoral thesis, I was writing on this, and so I had a lot of content written up in a way that nobody would want to read, because it's a doctor of ministry dissertation. Nobody wants to read that. So I actually approached Judson and I said, hey, what if I kind of redid this whole thing and added some more content, but just really made it more for people who, maybe college classes, but also just for Christians and other people who are interested in kind of justice in the world. And they were like, yeah, send a book proposal. We're having our roundtable with book proposals in 2 weeks. It's like, oh, okay. So as fast as I could, I drew one up and I submitted it. And very shortly thereafter, they said, yeah, let's do this. So I got to work. That was right at the beginning of COVID. So that was a little bit hard because I have two small kids, and they were even smaller then. And so it's hard to get away to write when everyone's trapped in the same house.
Right.
Just like a two-bedroom little house in National City. So eventually I was able to kind of break away and do a writing retreat and got a lot of it done and found other times beside that. But yeah, it just seemed important because the articles have been written.
Yeah.
We have reporters somewhat frequently down there, especially if there's news about the border and things like that. But there was never a book, and especially not a book that's interested in the Christian practical theological lens of like, what is this all about? So yeah, so I kind of brought together different streams from my own life and allowed people to share their own stories along the way. So it's pretty great. The book itself, every chapter highlights a different individual who's part of or has been impacted by the Border Church, and I tie each of those stories to values and practices of the Border Church. So things like faith, hope, and love, of course, but accompaniment, which is a really strong value of ours and something you see a lot of along the borders, right? In Spanish, the word is used a little bit more, but accompaniment, being there with another, not pulling them along, not pushing them ahead, but being alongside. And even the word itself, with the Latin root, uh, pan, if you know Spanish, pan means bread, right? Well, in the past, in Latin, right, it means to break bread with. And so that's what we do every week. We break bread at the Lord's table. And then on the Mexico side, because over there it's a perpetual fiesta, on the US side it's militarized and you got to hike a whole bunch just to get out there through a bunch of pollution and stuff. But on the Mexico side, this perpetual fiesta, they have a meal every Sunday, and people who are part of the border churches, people who kind of are in the area, because it's all outside, right? They show up and we eat and fellowship together. So breaking bread, accompanying one another in this really, really beautiful way. In the book, I talk a little bit about turning the table of the Lord or the bread of the Lord to the table or the bread for the world. And I think the Border Church does that in a pretty exciting way. And I've seen a lot of what used to be called ethnic congregations doing something similar, right? Where food and fellowship are so important.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think food ministries too for local churches are important. But if there's a way that it's not just here, take this and go on your merry way, but here, come and receive together. We're in this together, right? Shoulder to shoulder, sitting across from each other, next to each other. There's something more beautiful about that than just fulfilling basic human needs, which is bottom line, something that needs to happen. But how much better if the needs are met, the physical needs alongside like those spiritual and emotional and relational needs and desires.
You're speaking my language now, because when I
Good.
was serving when I was serving as pastor, food feels like it's
Mm-hmm.
something easy. We can put together and feed large numbers of people, and you've got people who are gifted to do all of that. But it goes getting them to understand that it goes beyond just putting food on a plate. It is that relational. It's sitting with. It's being a part of their lives. It's leaning in.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of that. That
Mm-hmm.
that I very much I get. I appreciate it because right. Everyone needs to eat, but they also need all those other things too, and sometimes just to know that somebody took 5 minutes to listen while
Yeah.
they talked about their life, and yeah, you wouldn't have the solution necessarily,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but you listened and they mattered.
Yeah.
Um, means more than anything that you could pay for a meal. So
Yeah.
um, I'm grateful for folks like you who keep showing up. Um, who keep showing, despite how difficult it's gotten, that you show up anyway. One of those parts in the book that just like really tears your heart out is thinking about parents, grandparents. This is the only way they've ever met their grandchild. The family members is through that fence, and now that we know that there's even more of a fence, how much harder, because you have those pictures in there, of up to the wall, where you've got hands.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and you're just going, oh my gosh, the tears, the tears that must have been joy and sorrow, all at the same time. So,
Yeah.
um, so what is it that you hope people are going to take away from the book?
Well, I think a few things. One is I would like folks to see the border and the borderlands through with more humane eyes, not just sensationalism, right? Because whether it's kind of left-wing media, right-wing media, centrist media, whatever it is, the news is always covering what is a little bit more sensational. So what we pick up in from the press, from the media, is going to be more sensationalized, right? Because they're only covering things that are catching eyes. But what's happening at the border is much more subtle. Those things are happening too, but the human lives are so much more complex. Yeah, the human lives there are more complex. The folks doing whatever it is they're doing have a whole bunch of reasons why. And so just thinking more through that human lens. And then as Christians, right, thinking more through the God lens. Where's God showing up here? Is God showing up here, right? Is the borderlands, are they just wastelands? No, God's there. God's still doing things. And then two, if people want to like kind of take that spirit home with them, because if you're in King of Prussia or New York City or rural Maine or northern Minnesota or wherever you are, you might not have the US-Mexico border. You might not have any border, but there's still ways that society and churches, even, and ourselves, that we put up walls. And are there ways for us as people doing ministry, as people involved with ministry, can accompany others if they're stuck at those walls? Are there ways that God is leading us to tear down the walls that we can tear down, right? Realizing some walls we can't tear down. Okay, what does it mean to show up and serve? Realizing some that we can tear down. What does it mean to do that? How do we do that in a way that, as much as possible, doesn't add to hurt, but actually allows for healing? If people are starting to have those conversations in their communities, in their congregations, if people are starting to have those internal dialogues or those complaining prayers with God or prayers of hope and assent with God, great. I think those are all takeaways. And then too, I feel once a writer and a publisher put out a book, it's up to the world and the readers to figure out what they're going to do with it, right? So I have some hopes, but if folks have their own takeaways, I think as long as they're kind of in line with the love of God and God's justice, great, right? I no longer have command over the words, and I definitely have never had command over how those words are taken in. So whatever the kind of that the magic of a reader, the words on the page, and the Spirit of God, whatever happens as a result of that, that's great.
Well, it's a definitely, again, if you're listening, not watching, I am once again holding up the book.
Beautiful book. I like that book.
It is a lovely book, and it's one that I will definitely recommend. Definitely recommend that you pick it up. Um, Again, you could do that at www.sethdavidclark.com, as well as judsonpress.com.org. And then there's that other site, Amazon, where we're sure it's also available. But we'd be happy to get it to you, share it with you.
Yeah. Yeah. If someone is going to buy a physical copy, 100% go to the Judson Press site, or go to my site, because if you get it through Judson Press, you're helping ABHMS continue their ministry. If you go to my site, you purchase it through the Border Church itself, and you help us do our ministry.
Oh, wonderful!
So however you're doing it, try to go those routes so that you're helping the good work, continue on.
And if people want to support your ministry at the Border Church, can they do that financially?
Yeah,
at your
I got
site?
a bunch of links in the at SethDavidClark.com. But yeah, it's if you go to borderchurch.org, or honestly, you can email me. I'll tell you my email right now, listeners. SethDavidClark@gmail.com. So it's real simple.
I can also put it, I can put it below. I can put it below for our listeners, for our listeners, because that's going to do a lot of good. But I can put it below for those who are watching. And as he said, it's not like a secret from anybody. It's SethDavidClark@gmail.com. Or you can get a hold of me if you forget for some reason, and I'll give it to you. Whatever. I don't.
Just a couple more ways to kind of stay in touch with Border Church is we have it's about a weekly e-newsletter that goes out, and I write like a little reflection. And I didn't realize until in the last few months but some people are like really encouraged by that reflection. It has like this Borderlands perspective, and we're always trying to tie, at least as much as possible, tie what's happening at the Borderlands and at Border Church to the scripture for the week. And some people I think are really encouraged by it. So they can sign up for that at borderchurch.org or emailing me or whatever. And then too, we have a pretty active Facebook Live presence. So it's 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific. Every Sunday we go live at Facebook Live.
Okay, so borderchurch.org, is that what we are?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make sure we have that too. Here. Yeah. Show that.
There it is, borderchurch.org.
And so yes, please be a part of this ministry, prayerfully, financially, however you can.
Absolutely.
That's not my goal when I do these. My goal when I do these is just to give people a place to tell their stories, and talk about the great work that they're doing, because these are the stories that not everyone hears. And there are many stories, many that I think out of your ministry need to be told. I don't want to forget my joy question, because no, I just can't forget it, because what would I do episode 1 of season 2? I'd have to call you back and be like, wait, we've got to do an add-on. So the joy question goes, you're allowed to answer this however you want. Okay. In all that you do, pastor, writer, dad, all of that, what brings you joy?
That's a good question. Before we get into that, I would be remiss if I didn't tell the listeners and you that Border Church is grateful that ABHMS is a consistent supporter. So that brings me joy, that part of my kind of denominational family is like actively involved with the Border Church. Okay.
Yeah. But that, no. Yay! Plug for
plug for ABHMS. So that's good. And a lot of other great supporters. But I think what I'm gonna answer with two answers, if that's okay.
Sure.
One is a little more personal, and one is more kind of ministerial, in a sense. So the personal one is just like my kids, 3 and 5. They're at this age where, like, there's so much newness, and the emotions are so big. This morning on the way to school, we're in San Diego, so it doesn't rain a whole lot, but there's been so much rain lately, and it rained unexpectedly. And I was glad that we chose to drive. Normally we walk, but I was glad we chose to drive because it was raining. But as we were getting out of the car, the kids had their umbrellas and their cute little jackets on. It was this beautiful rainbow, just gorgeous. And my son Max, he said, "That's the first time I've ever seen a rainbow." And I felt just so honored. There's joy there and gratitude and a whole mix of emotions. But I was just so honored to be there experiencing that moment with him. And that beauty is so great. So just seeing through their eyes wonderful new things and experiencing life with them. And I try to be, I'm not always perfect at it, but I try to be someone who just makes sure to intentionally carve out time, right? With 2 different ministries, that can be hard, but carving out that time, I think, is so important. And for the listeners, nudge, nudge, not to moralize it, but like, there's a lot of joy that can happen if you just take the time to be with your kids. And then the other thing is, one other thing I didn't talk about with the Plymouth Brethren is every week they celebrate the Lord's Supper, right? They don't call it communion usually, but Lord's Supper, breaking bread. And a lot of things have kind of moved on from in terms of like certain practices and certain ways of being as church. And obviously, right, I'm a pastor in a different denomination now, but that one is just always stuck with me, like, because when I'm reading scripture, when I'm reading ancient theology, and when I experience it for myself, there's just something so wonderful and so beautiful about sharing communion together, and being able to do that in this just crazy complex place at the border is something that it fills me with joy, right? I experience communion in certain profound levels at that 2 events more than I have in the most beautiful of churches or the best run ministries, whatever it might be, the most highly programmatized ministries, with like the awesome band and the perfect sermon and whatever. Just the simplicity, but also the counter narrative that King Jesus is real and is bigger. There's something so profound and so joyous in that. So every Sunday when I get to do that, it's once in a while I still kind of get caught up in the procession of it all. But when I just really am able to take the time, it's so meaningful and so joyful. So those are my 2.
Those are great answers. And I think I'm going to think of Max now every time I see a rainbow, because, out here, it's a regular occurrence. But to oh, wow, that's the first time I've ever seen one. How amazing is that? How amazing is that? So
good.
Yeah, absolutely. So Reverend Dr. Seth David Clark, author of the lovely, wonderful book, Church at the Wall. Thank you so much for being my guest today, for sharing your story and giving of your time, and blessings to you and this ministries that you have, and hopefully people will continue to support you, and you will see growth, and we pray that one day real change will happen and those walls won't be there. Yeah. So, again, thank
They
you
haven't
so
been there
much.
for too long.
Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't been there for too long, and they don't need to be there for too
Right.
long. That's how I feel.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and we thank everyone for watching and for listening. And join us again Mondays at 11.
Thanks, Meg.
Thank you.